Really horrific scenes I was looking at last night when a supposedly peaceful protest, protesting for the right to continue to peacefully protest, turned very, very violent. Your thoughts this morning?
Yeah, it was horrific watching it unfold. And I spoke with colleagues last night from the local police federation who were out on the street supporting colleagues. I also spoke with the chief constable, and we've had 12 police officers who've been injured, two of them seriously, and a number had to go into hospital for treatment. So the level of violence and hatred that my colleagues were presented with. And I genuinely don't believe that this was the protesters who might have a legitimate concern. I mean, we're in a strange place, aren't we? Because protests are unlawful because of the unlawful gatherings. But when this moved into the evening, it was not about protest. It was about violence. It was about hatred. It was about anarchy. And individuals were doing anything they could to disrupt the city of Bristol. I mean, in one case, Julia, you've seen the images, but in one case, there was an individual who appeared to be trying to set fire to a police van with my colleague still inside. That's not protest. That's attempt murder.
Absolutely. I mean, again, I'm all in favour of people having the right to peaceful protest. I feel very strongly about that. And I want to talk about the anti-lockdown protesters on Saturday as well with you. But when you call a protest kill the bill, now I understand these people were, and there were peaceful protesters, the vast majority of them earlier on. They were protesting about the bill, the police and crime bill, which will make it much, much easier to stop a peaceful protest from going ahead. It will also make it much harder for Extinction Rebellion or Black Lives Matter, whoever, to sort of bring whole cities to a standstill. So, and there are lots of people who may well be in two minds on that. But a peaceful protest to protest that is one thing. A violent protest doesn't really make a strong case for that, because what they did yesterday was undoubtedly criminal. Now, not only did you see the setting fire of the police vans and the graffitiing of that and the smashing of that, we also saw the smashing of the police station windows and damage there. But we also saw running battles with the police. I watched a lot of videos last night where we saw the grabbing of one of the police shields and the riot police. And again, I have not been in favour of an awful lot of the policing that has gone on in recent weeks, and always speak out when I don't agree with it. But as a general rule, I'm on the side of law and order and of the police. And I think the police are sent out to do a very, very difficult job in very difficult circumstances, often with not just one but two hands tied behind their back. And I think the vast majority of police officers are trying to do a very good job peacefully. But I saw police officers being attacked. I also saw some extraordinary footage, and we're going to show it now, but don't worry, people who are eating their breakfast, we are going to pixelate it. Police officers standing there with their riot shields, as two people in the crowd came forward, pulled down their trousers and defecated on the ground right at the feet of those police officers. I mean, absolutely extraordinary behaviour.
It's disgusting. I mean, we call this a dirty protest. We deal with it a lot in cells where people will display their frustration at being locked up by decorating the walls with things. But to have it in this type of situation is a new low. And the other thing I'd say, Julia, on social media, where you and I will know, there's an awful lot of experts in public order tactics. There was an individual who actually said, I couldn't believe what I was reading, that they believe that police officers allowed the vans to be set on fire, so it looked good in the media and it undermined I mean, that's the level of stupidity that we're dealing with. And it does undermine the right for peaceful protest. Look, I've been a police officer for more than 28 years. I don't like the way that we've had to police over this past year. Many of my colleagues don't. I'm a big believer in the right for peaceful protest. And we're in a difficult place at the moment. But when it turns violent, the level of hatred and anger, and I hear many people say, I don't condone the violence, but, well, then they've lost the argument, because nobody can say that last night, that level of violence was in any way justified.
Is there an issue, though, that after the police stood by last summer while Black Lives Matter, or people claiming to be Black Lives Matter protesters, tore down a statue to the slave trader Edward Colston and then dragged it down the street and toppled it in the river? I mean, when police stand by and watch that sort of criminal behaviour and do nothing, do they not set a precedent that actually violent protesters, people who take the law into their own hands, think they can get away with it?
It's really difficult. And actually, when that happened last year, Julia, I'll be the first to say that that really concerned me, what I saw. And I said that in the media. And I don't stand by those comments that I made then, because I've since learned an awful lot more about the dynamics of that particular protest. The reality is there were simply not enough police officers. If you look in Bristol and even in Somerset last night, there's only a finite number of police officers and resources available. They had to press the mutual aid button, which is getting other police officers in from other areas. And we try, policing tactics for public order situations is really complex, because what evidence will tell you is that if we do go in heavy-handed, first of all, our critics will say that you shouldn't have done that, or others will want us to go in more heavy-handed. But that can ignite things, that can make things even worse than they could be. And if we don't have the resources, it puts those officers that we do have in an incredibly dangerous position.
And I think a lot of people were very concerned about that. Can I talk to you also, though, about the anti-lockdown protests in London? It was a march. And again, big debates about whether are these illegal or not illegal. It seems to me people just walking down the street taking their exercise is perfectly legal, a peaceful march. I mean, there were the reports in the media saying there were hundreds of people. They were quite clearly, from the footage I saw, many, many thousands of people, very, very peacefully. We're going to be speaking to someone who was actually on the march a little bit later in the show. And huge numbers of people, all very peaceful. At the end, though, I got a number of witnesses who've spoken to me yesterday who said that the riot police were then sent in and just started doing, and we've seen this at previous lockdown protests, where people are simply walking along. It's nearly always they wait to the end. It's the stragglers, the last few hundred in the park. And then they go in and they just target one person and they surround them and grab them and take them to the ground. There's one bit of footage of a man being hauled to the ground. All he was doing was walking backwards, filming the someone else who'd been arrested. He wasn't in any way. I've watched the full footage. I've asked the person who did the footage to actually send me the full footage before and after to make sure I've got it in context. In no way was this man doing anything whatsoever. He was kicked to the ground. Now, there are legitimate ways in which police can get someone to the ground, but he wasn't he wasn't doing anything other than filming, walking backwards. How could he possibly be a threat to anybody? There are a lot of concerns that when the police do go in heavy-handed to peaceful protests like this, at which there'd be no trouble, then the police create the problem themselves.
I completely understand that, and certainly with the advent of social media, everybody is an expert, and it's about context. And I wasn't there, Julia. I've spoken to some colleagues who were policing that protest, and they will say to me that they really are, and I've used this phrase so many times, they're damned if they do and damned if they don't. And there will be other things, other factors at play. What they don't want is for a protest which looks peaceful on the surface. They don't want it to turn into anything else. So they have to act in certain ways. Policing protests, especially when they start to turn violent, or even when it appears they're not, they don't look pretty. Some of the tactics that we use, which are, accepted by courts and the Home Office and so on, they're not pretty. For your average person watching it on the television, they'll say that's outrageous that the police have done that.
I think kicking a man to the ground who is not committing a violent offence is outrageous, I'm afraid.
Well, it depends on the circumstance. I think I know what you're talking about, because I saw you post it. That when you say kick somebody to the ground, the language that you use, and I understand. But that's actually taking somebody's legs from them, which is an approved.
He had
tactic.
already been grabbed. He wasn't doing anything. I tell you what. If your officers grabbed me in that circumstance, I'd fight back.
Yeah, I'm sure you would.
20 police officers were injured, some with broken bones, some still remaining in hospital after that supposedly peaceful protest turned very violent outside Bristol police station last night, with police vans set alight, broken windows and graffiti all over a police station in Bristol, and attacks on police officers. Let's talk to the Mayor of Bristol, Marvin Rees, right now. Good morning to you, and thank you for joining us.
Good morning.
Your reaction to that supposedly peaceful protest, which was actually there to protest against the police and crime bill, which was banning their view peaceful protests turning so violent, leaving 20 police officers injured.
Yeah, we're outraged by it and absolutely condemn what happened in the city yesterday. And that group of people who I suspect were looking for any opportunity to enter into a physical confrontation with symbols of what they see as the establishment. So it's not acceptable in our city.
I don't think anyone sane would regard it as acceptable. It's outrageous that our police officers should have to put up with that. Have you seen not only videos, of course, people setting fire to a police van, when a police officer was inside it, jumping on it, smashing windows, running battles with the police with their shields. But we also also seen a video of two protesters walking forward to police with their shields, pulling down their trousers and defecating on the ground in front of them at their feet. What on earth do you make of that?
I mean, what do you say to that? It's pathetic. Well, it's worse than pathetic. I mean, it's also politically illiterate. I mean, we're doing the real job in this city of trying to tackle inequality, trying to be ferociously ambitious for Bristol, feed our children, work on domestic violence, mental health. What they did last night has nothing to do with the needs of people in this city or in this country. It's just selfish, self-indulgent and self-centered behaviour that's all about them living out their fantasies of being revolutionaries. That's what it is.
Well, let's talk about what happened last year, though, because obviously you absolutely were very clear that you would not condone any criminal damage last year when we saw the Colston statue toppling. But is there an issue with the fact that last year people were seen to be allowed to just carry out wanton criminal behaviour for a long period of time? It took them a long time to topple that statue. It took them a long time to drag it, to drop it into the water. And yet police stood by and watched throughout. Has a message been sent that actually, criminal behaviour will be tolerated?
No, it hasn't. And I don't think it's fair to describe it as police standing by. What they were doing was managing a situation. 10,000 people on the streets, and they managed it. And the only piece of criminal damage was the statue being pulled down. I think it was wise, ego-free, emotionally intelligent policing that avoided us having the kind of violent confrontations we saw in the capital last week and that we saw in the city this week. Every protest is different, and you have to approach it differently. You don't strike every time you're in a confrontation. You have to weigh up the situation and make a judgment. And our officers are on the front line, and they made that judgment. And I think last year they made a very wise judgment on how to manage that situation.
And in terms of where we move forward, we say police officers are still in hospital right now. A huge amount of damage done. The policing operation understood now last night to have cost around £1 million. What happens next?
Well, I think we as a city will be making a clear statement about what we stand for. This is not in line with the city we've been building over the last few years. We have kind of a world-renowned now approach to partnership working in Bristol, where we're holding together our ambition and our compassion. What these characters did in the city yesterday has nothing to do with that. Last week, we hosted an incredible event called Bristol Remembers, just acknowledging the loss and talking about how we recover and rebuild from the loss that so many people have experienced over the last year. That's the stage in our city's history that we're at, not these characters going out and trying to smash our city up. So we need to reassert who we are and where we're going, and not allow these guys to take over and consume that the way we understand ourselves and talk about ourselves and where we're going.
Bristol Mayor Marvin Rees, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Just a quick word from Will Geddes, who's a security expert on that. I mean, those scenes overnight are absolutely extraordinary from Bristol, aren't they?
Yeah, no, astounding. And also, I think what we've got to not lose focus of is the fact that this bill is actually over and beyond just protest. This is for increasing crimes against serious criminals, offences against children, people in positions of power where they are dealing with children, offences, ironically, of assault against emergency services workers and the police. There were so many things which just literally were so off the mark, and this was evidently just hijacked from those that had perhaps legitimate arguments. As
is often the case. And again, I think people are perfectly entitled to peacefully protest against efforts to prevent peaceful protests as they see it. But that's very, very different from anything turning violent. As we saw, police estimate that we did see something like 3,000 people on that protest when it started yesterday, got down to 400 or 500 who that's when it turned violent. And as is often the case with these, of course, that completely overshadowing the conversation I really wanted to have today was about that anti-lockdown protest on Saturday in London, which was almost entirely peaceful, and yet we saw 30 arrests there. We did see police sort of going in at the very end of the stragglers, and I say big issues there. We're going to be talking to Lawrence Fox a little bit later, who was on that march, about his what he saw with that anti-lockdown protest.